Hey everyone, Man Tamar here, and I'll be reviewing the Amazing Spider-Man reboot. I saw it in theaters yesterday, and thought I would wait until today to review it to process how I felt from watching the film and what I wanted to talk about. Basically, I didn't want to rush this review. I've seen Pathogen Freed's review. I enjoyed that. And I had a instant message Skype conversation with StormSync over the film. He views it as being mostly the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. In my personal opinion here, I think that he is completely wrong. In fact, nothing really establishes to say directly that it's in Ultimate Spider-Man. From what I've heard, that according to StormSync, the writer set the film with mixing both the classic and modern Spider-Man comics. You know, those two worlds together. I don't view it as that. Here's why. In the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, Mary Jane was Peter Parker's main love interest. In the Amazing Spider-Man comics, Gwen Stacy was Peter's first love. In Ultimate Spider-Man, Captain Stacy was killed by a robber who was dressed as Spider-Man. In fact, I believe what happened was a bomb was thrown over a roof near where Captain Stacy was, and I think Captain Stacy caught the bomb, and moments later it blew up. He died, and Gwen Stacy believed that Spider-Man did it, so she hated Spider-Man and wanted to kill him. I don't know if the Lizard was actually in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, but as for the warehouse, I viewed that as Peter either wanting to skateboard alone or test out his agility. And if that's the case, he can't really do it out in public, because if he did that, it would raise questions. And so, and I'm not really familiar with New York, but so what if he was at a warehouse? Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to do with Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, if he was testing out his webbing in a warehouse, then that could be a nod to Ultimate Spider-Man. And the Albert Einstein poster, that doesn't necessarily mean it's Ultimate Spider-Man either, because Peter Parker as a character, he's a nerd. So of course he would look up to Albert Einstein. And even in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, in Peter Parker's room, he has a poster of Albert Einstein. So there's no real connection to say, because there's a Albert Einstein poster in Peter Parker's room, that it's connected to Ultimate Spider-Man. And then there's, of course, the modern timeline. Even though Ultimate Spider-Man is centered more toward the 21st century, the reboot is obviously going to be set in the current timeline, which is 2012. You know, it wouldn't make any sense to have the film set in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, because the people behind the movie, they want to have the film connect with the audience, and of course most of the audience is going to be young, you know, whether it be kids, teenagers, adults in their 20s. So of course they want to, you know, make that emotional connection, and the current events are happening during the time. You know where I'm getting at with here. So nothing there points to Ultimate Spider-Man. And as for the Lizard, he's a genetic character, meaning it's the same origin as before, that Kirk Connors injected himself with the serum to regrow his arm, and when he became the Lizard, it affected his personality, his mental state. The genetic of the Lizard was corrupting his mind and making him want to turn the citizens of New York into lizards, basically repopulate the world with that species. That's a main storyline from even back in the 90s. I even recall from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon that was on Fox that the Lizard wanted to turn the people of New York into lizards. So, you can't really say it's splicing, because with the Goblin, that was in fact a splicing effect, because the Norman Osborn injected himself with some kind of serum that turned him into a goblin. So you can't really say that, because this is a lizard, and like I already stated, that's something that has stayed the same in the past incarnations of the character. So when you really stop and think about it, there's no clear cut and dry of saying this is centered on Ultimate Spider-Man. So that's where I disagree with Stormsick, that nothing really ties together to directly point and say, this is from Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, onto the film. I felt this was an awesome origin story, the textbook definition of how to tell the story of Spider-Man. And I will agree with Stormsick on the point that Sam Raimi should have not made Spider-Man and actually sat in the theater and took notes from this, because this is how you're supposed to make a Spider-Man film. They established Peter Parker great in a great way, by showing him in high school, showing us his personality before he became Spider-Man, and I felt it addressed his personality in the sake of his humor, where he would be a smart ass to the Flash. Excuse me, Flash Thompson. I don't want to confuse people with the Flash from DC Comics. He mouthed off to Flash Thompson in the film. He even stood up for a student when Flash was picking on this other student during lunch and trying to humiliate him in front of everyone, and told Peter to take a photo of the situation, and Peter said no. As for the basketball scene, I don't really have a problem with that, though. I saw it as Peter showing off, and partly getting payback for what Flash did to him earlier when he beat him up. Now, the only thing I disagree with on that part was when Peter was in the counselor's office with his Uncle Ben, and Uncle Ben was upset with him because of what happened, and asked him, "Did you humiliate that boy?" And I mean, maybe he could have gotten in trouble because of breaking the backboard of the basketball court. That I could see as it being a problem, but I mean, if it was centered on Flash Thompson, I don't really see why, because the only thing he did was knock him down when he went to go make the basket, and Then after that, I like that Ben was somewhat strict, because in the Sam Raimi original, you didn't really see that. I mean, when Peter mouthed off to his uncle, well, not, excuse me, didn't mouth off, he snapped at Uncle Ben in the car in Sam Raimi's version. You didn't see Uncle Ben, lecture him. He just had this, like, expression that his heart was broken. And in this one, you really get to see some parenting between Uncle Ben and Peter. After the stunt he did with Flash, Uncle Ben pointed out that, well, since I had to come up here, I had to have my shift at work changed, so you're going to have to pick up your Aunt May. And then he furthers the somewhat lecture or punish, if you could call it punishment, that he saw Gwen Stacy and said, Peter's got a picture of you in his room, to make it somewhat awkward for him. I like that. So then Peter had to explain, well, it's from, a event debate. And that got to them talking and sort of asking Gwen out there. Maybe Uncle Ben was trying to convince them to have a conversation with Gwen Stacy and ask her out. Who knows? Then we see Peter spending quality time with Kirk Connors in this project at Oscorp. I saw that. I like that they were doing a sort of mentorship there, because in the film there, you really get to have two mentors for Peter. One was Captain Stacy. I viewed him, even though they didn't agree when it came to the Spider-Man situation, but there are some scenes where Peter, respected Gwen Stacy, namely when he was having dinner at Captain Stacy's home with Gwen and her siblings and parents, and they talked about Spider-Man, and the debate got a bit heated, and before Peter walked out, he made it pretty clear to me that he didn't mean to come off as disrespectful. That wasn't his intention. So he does, in fact, have respect for Captain Stacy. And I really enjoyed the film, namely the scene with the car thief. That was my all-time favorite scene in the film, because you get to see that humor that is Spider-Man, and he's having fun with stopping the criminal, and then the altercation with the cop and saying, I just did 80% of your job, and that's how you repay me. I'm looking forward to the sequel, which is said to be, I believe, May 2nd, 2014. So less than 2 years. I don't know who's going to write it, but I'll be sure to keep tabs on that. So if anyone wants me to do updates for the sequel, I'd be more than happy to. Nothing but praises for this film. Emma Stone did a great job as Gwen Stacy. Dennis Leary was a good Captain Stacy, and I view that his death was not only central to the plot, because in my personal point of view, if he stayed alive after finding out that Peter was in fact Spider-Man, he wouldn't allow Gwen Stacy to continue dating Peter, because she would be in danger, and he's worried about her safety. And when it comes to the comics, Gwen Stacy and Peter are a long-time love interest. I don't know how long, because I'm only familiar with the Mary Jane and Peter Parker relationship, but when it comes to the sequel, I really hope they do not go with the Green Goblin, that they go with a villain that we haven't seen before, because I want to see the Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy relationship, grow further, so that if maybe in a third or fourth film that they do in fact have the Green Goblin and incorporate the iconic scene of the bridge where the Green Goblin drops Gwen Stacy and she dies. It would make her death more of an impact, because both for the characters and the viewers who grew in this relationship and invested in in their history, it would make it more emotional, in my opinion, and memorable. If it happened in the second film, it would seem too soon, because you wouldn't know what the timeline between the two films, if it would be a couple of months, a year, because we don't know what we know that Gwen Stacy is 17, so she's likely either a junior or senior. Peter could be a sophomore, no idea. But overall, this to me is how a Spider-Man film should be. I have high praises for Andrew Garfield's performance, namely, for the comedy, but also for Uncle Ben's death scene, because in this film you actually see Uncle Ben die. You see him get shot, and you see Peter Parker's reaction to that, and I thought that Andrew Garfield pulled that off wonderfully. I mean, you really see his heart-wrenching emotion that he's both saddened, he's shocked, he's desperate to have someone help him, by not only trying to stop the bleeding, but pleading to someone to call 911, and the emotion in his face is genuine. With Sam Raimi's film, it was half-assed. I mean, no offense to Tobey Maguire, but it's been a couple of years since I have seen that film, and the one thing I do remember is that you could barely see any emotion with Tobey Maguire. I mean, he's crying, but you don't really see that the distress. I mean, you see that he's emotionally sad, but then a moment later, you hear a cop say that the robber is going down, so-and-so street, so then it then changes to anger, and he wants to go out and get revenge. In this film, if I'm right on this, Peter didn't even find the guy that killed his uncle, and in the film here, they took their time in creating the costume. It started out with just the hood, the covering, so to speak, some sunglasses over it, and he was, whenever there was a dispatch on the radio that he had, he would go and check it out, and he was centered on finding this guy, and he never did. So that could be a central plot or a subplot for the sequel. He could still be looking for the guy that killed his uncle. And there's also the equation that his father, Richard Parker, was working on. We don't know what that is, but Peter did in fact spend time in working through it. Was it something to do with some kind of experiment? Was it webbing or a cure for cancer? We don't know. that might be explored in the sequel as well. Yeah, there are a lot of open doors here for other storylines to coexist into future films. So nothing was really tied up in this film, which I enjoy, because it sort of changed my outlook for the comic book film. There are some things I was expecting to happen, namely Peter and Uncle Ben to have a last heart-to-heart, because when Peter had an argument with his uncle and stormed out of the house, it was a heated conversation, and part of me was thinking that after Uncle Ben was shot, that Peter would talk with Uncle Ben and say he's sorry, or something to, you know, give that send-off that he resents what he said before he left the house, but that didn't happen, and it made it more realistic, because, you know, in reality, sometimes we say things that we don't mean, and it results in someone close to us dying, and then there's that never knowing if they understood that we did not mean to say certain words that came out that from the heat of the moment and was out of anger and wasn't genuinely meant. You know, that's the thing with reality, and that hit home with this film, you know, and brought a sense of realism for this film, and I can't wait for it to be released on Blu-ray, because I fully intend to buy it on Blu-ray when it's released. It might come out maybe during the holiday season, but I would love to hear what other people thought of this film. I give it a 9 out of 10. And please rate, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, peace out.